There is a story you have been telling yourself for years, and it goes something like this. You are too much. You feel too deeply, you care too intensely, you read rooms that other people don't even notice, and you carry emotions the way other people carry keys. Constantly, automatically, without even choosing to. You have been told, in 100 different ways, by 100 different people, that this is a flaw, that your sensitivity is a burden, that your empathy is a weakness dressed up in good intentions. And somewhere along the way, you believe them. But here's what nobody told you. What if the problem was never you? What if every time you cried at a song, every time you stayed up at 3 in the morning replaying a conversation and wondering if you said the wrong thing, every time you absorbed someone else's bad mood like a sponge and carried it around all day as if it were yours, you weren't broken? What if you were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to hold something as rare as you? That thought might feel uncomfortable right now, maybe even a little scary, because if it's true, then a lot of the stories you've been carrying about yourself need to be rewritten. And that is exactly what we are going to do today. Let's go back to something that might feel familiar. Think about the last time you expressed how you felt to someone who was supposed to care about you. Maybe you told them you felt dismissed. Maybe you said something hurt you. Maybe you just needed to be heard, really heard, not fixed, not redirected, not told you were overreacting. And instead of being received, you were managed. You were given a short response. You were told, maybe not in those exact words, that your feelings were inconvenient, that you were being dramatic, that you needed to calm down. And so you did what you always do. You swallowed it. You apologized. You made yourself smaller, quieter, easier. And then you walked away feeling ashamed of yourself for having needed something in the first place. If that hit somewhere close to home, I need you to stay with me right here, because this is where everything starts to unravel. Psychology has a name for what you just experienced. It's called emotional invalidation, and it is one of the most quietly damaging things a human being can experience repeatedly over time. When your emotions are consistently dismissed, minimized, or met with irritation, your nervous system doesn't just feel hurt. It starts to learn. It starts to wire itself around the belief that having emotions is dangerous, that expressing a need is a risk, that the safest version of you is the one who needs the least. And here's the cruel part. Sensitive people experience this more than most, not because their emotions are out of control, but because they are more expressive, more attuned, more willing to name what is happening inside them. In a world that often rewards emotional suppression and calls it maturity, your expressiveness gets labeled as instability. Your depth gets called neediness. Your awareness gets called overthinking. You weren't overthinking, you were the only one paying attention. Researchers in the field of sensory processing and emotional depth have long studied what Dr. Elaine Aron first described as the highly sensitive person, someone who processes information more deeply, notices subtleties others miss, and feels both joy and pain with greater intensity. Studies suggest that around 15 to 20% of the population carries this trait. That means it is not a disorder, it is not a dysfunction, it is a neurological variation with deep evolutionary roots. Highly sensitive people are often the ones who sense danger before it arrives, who notice the shift in someone's energy before a word is spoken, who pick up on injustice in places others have stopped looking. That is not weakness. That is a form of intelligence so old and so refined that most people can't even perceive it. But here is what happens when that kind of intelligence grows up in the wrong soil. When it is surrounded by people who don't understand it, who are threatened by it, who need you to be less so they can feel like more. It turns on itself. You start to believe that the sensitivity is the problem, not the people who punished you for having it. Think about who taught you that you were too sensitive. Really think about it. Was it a parent who couldn't handle their own emotions and so your tears made them defensive? Was it a partner who called you dramatic when you pointed out something that genuinely hurt? Was it a friend who laughed off your feelings and made you feel ridiculous for having them? Was it a workplace where vulnerability was treated as unprofessionalism and emotional distance was rewarded with respect? Was it a culture, maybe even the one you grew up in, that told men not to cry and told women they were hysterical when they did? Because the people who told you that you were too sensitive were, almost without exception, people who were too comfortable with not feeling enough. And it is always easier to point at the person feeling everything and say there is the problem than to look inward and ask, why am I so afraid of depth? Your sensitivity was never the wound. Being in proximity to people who couldn't meet you there, that was the wound. And now I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: the toll that takes. Not just emotionally, but physically. Empaths and highly sensitive people who have spent years suppressing who they are, contorting themselves to be palatable, and absorbing the emotions of others without ever releasing them, often carry that weight in their bodies. Chronic tension, fatigue that no amount of sleep seems to fix, a kind of low-grade anxiety that hums underneath everything, digestive issues, headaches, a feeling of being perpetually depleted without any clear reason why. This is not a coincidence. The body keeps the score, as the research has long confirmed. And when you spend years performing emotional labor for others while denying your own emotional needs, your nervous system eventually sends the bill. The constant hypervigilance of monitoring other people's moods, the second-guessing, the preemptive apologizing, the never-ending recalibration of yourself to make someone else comfortable. All of it lives in the body long after the conversations are over. You are tired. Not because you are weak, because you have been doing the work of two people for most of your life. Yours, and the emotional work that the people around you were too avoidant, or too immature, or too defended to do themselves. And here is where I need to say something that might sting a little, because I care about you too much to skip it. You have been complicit in some of this. Not because you wanted to be hurt, not because you enjoy being taken for granted, but because somewhere along the way you started to confuse being needed with being loved. And those are not the same thing. When you make yourself indispensable to someone by fixing their moods, absorbing their chaos, and shrinking your own needs to accommodate theirs, you are not building a relationship. You are auditioning for one, over and over, and never quite getting the part because the role you keep showing up for is the one where you sacrifice yourself, and that role doesn't come with the reciprocity you are aching for. Empaths are often drawn to people who need rescuing, not because they are foolish, but because in the presence of someone who needs them, they finally feel a sense of purpose and belonging. The connection feels deep and real because the emotional intensity is high. But intensity is not intimacy. Chaos is not chemistry. And needing someone is not the same as choosing them. You have been chosen, genuinely chosen. Your whole self, your full depth, your highs and your complicated lows, by so few people that you may have started to believe you are simply too much to be chosen at all. But that is the lie that took root in the wrong garden, and you have been watering it ever since. The truth is this: you are not too much. You have just been surrounded by people with too little capacity. Let's talk about what it actually looks like when sensitive people end up in the wrong environments. Because it doesn't always announce itself with red flags. Sometimes it looks like a friendship where you are always the one initiating, always the one remembering birthdays, always the one asking how they are doing. And when you stop for a moment to see if they reach back, there is silence. Sometimes it looks like a romantic relationship where your partner's perfectly fine when things are easy, but goes cold the moment real emotion enters the room. And you have learned to manage your feelings around them the way you'd manage a fragile antique, handling them carefully so nothing gets broken, except the thing that keeps getting broken is you. Sometimes it looks like a family dynamic where your role has been the peacekeeper, the one who smooths things over, the one who keeps the emotional temperature regulated for everyone else, and no one ever thinks to ask how you are doing under all that weight. In these environments, over time, sensitive people start to exhibit a very specific set of behaviors that look, from the outside, like personal failings, but are actually adaptations. They over-explain themselves because they have learned that their feelings alone are not considered sufficient justification. They apologize before asserting anything, to preemptively disarm the dismissal they have come to expect. They minimize their own pain when speaking about it, because full expression has been met with eye rolls or sighs, and they would rather understate than be told they are exaggerating again. They people-please not out of generosity, but out of fear, because somewhere they learned that their value is conditional on their usefulness. And they gaslight themselves over and over, telling themselves that maybe they are overreacting, maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe they need to give the person another chance. These are not character flaws. These are survival strategies, and they made sense in the environments where they were formed. But they are costing you everything in the life you are trying to build now. Here is a psychological concept I want to offer you, gently, because it explains so much. It is called the fawn response. You have probably heard of fight, flight, and freeze, the three classic responses to perceived threat. But there is a fourth one, and sensitive people are disproportionately represented in it. The fawn response is when you appease, when you make yourself agreeable, compliant, emotionally invisible in order to neutralize a threat and maintain connection. When a child grows up in an environment where love feels conditional or unpredictable, where expressing needs leads to punishment or withdrawal, the nervous system learns that the safest way to survive is to become whatever the other person needs in the moment, to feel into their emotional state and mirror it back, to anticipate their needs before being asked, to smooth over conflict before it can erupt. Sound familiar? The fawn response, left unexamined, follows you into adulthood and into every relationship. It is why you can sense what someone needs before they say a word, but have no idea what you yourself need. It is why you can hold space for everyone around you, but cannot let anyone hold space for you without deflecting or apologizing. It is why being truly cared for can feel deeply uncomfortable, almost suspicious, because in your nervous system's language, love that doesn't cost you something doesn't feel real. But here is what healing looks like, and I want you to hold on to this. Healing for a sensitive person is not about becoming less sensitive. It is not about building walls or becoming harder or learning to care less. Anyone who has told you that is pointing you in exactly the wrong direction. True healing is learning to stay in your full sensitivity while becoming radically selective about where you offer it. It is learning to read the room differently. Not in the old way, where you are scanning for threats and calibrating yourself to avoid them, but in a new way, where you are asking, does this person have the capacity to receive what I am bringing? Are they someone who has done their own emotional work? Do they make space for my feelings the way I make space for theirs? Do I feel more like myself around them or less? Because you deserve relationships where you do not have to shrink, where your depth is not a burden, but a gift that is received with gratitude, where someone asks how you are doing and then actually waits for the answer, where your sensitivity is seen not as a problem to be managed, but as a quality that makes the relationship richer, more honest, more alive. Those people exist. I promise you they exist. But you will not find them while you are still pouring your energy into people who fundamentally cannot meet you, hoping that if you just love them hard enough, long enough, patiently enough, they will eventually become capable of it. You cannot love someone into having emotional depth they have never developed. You cannot be sensitive enough for both of you. And every year you spend trying is a year you are not spending with the people who would have received you the first time. I want to say something about grief here, because this realization, the one you might be sitting with right now, comes with grief. And I don't want to rush past that. When you recognize that you were never the problem, that your sensitivity was never the disorder, there is a moment of relief followed almost immediately by a wave of something that is harder to name. Sadness for the younger version of you who believed the lie. Anger at the people who told it. Loss for the years spent apologizing for things that needed no apology. Mourning for the relationships you poured yourself into that could not hold you. Grief for the version of yourself you suppressed, the loud one, the needy one, the one who wanted too much and felt everything and refused to apologize for it. Let yourself feel that, all of it. That grief is not weakness. It is clarity arriving. It is the beginning of something true. And when the grief starts to move, something else starts to come in, something quieter and more solid. It is self-trust. That feeling of knowing deep in your body that your perception was always right, that the things you sensed were real, that the dynamics you tried to name were happening, that the exhaustion you felt was not a personal failing, but an accurate response to an impossible situation. You were not crazy. You were not too sensitive. You were the only one in the room who was paying full attention.
So what do you do now?
I don't want to hand you a 10-step program because you have been through enough lists. But I do want to leave you with this. Start paying attention to how you feel in the aftermath of your interactions. Not during them, because sensitive people are often so busy managing the dynamic in real time that their own feelings get postponed. But after. When you walk away from a conversation with someone, how do you feel in your body? Do you feel energized or drained? Do you feel more like yourself or less? Do you feel seen, or do you feel subtly ashamed of having shown up as much as you did? Those feelings are data. They are your nervous system reporting back on the health of the environment you just left. Start treating them like information. Start practicing the radical act of not explaining yourself. You do not have to justify your feelings with a lengthy argument. You do not have to make your emotional experience palatable and well-reasoned before it deserves to be honored. You feel what you feel. That is enough. The people who need an essay before they will validate your experience are people who don't yet understand that emotions are not arguments. They don't require a winning case. They require a witness. And start, slowly and imperfectly, letting yourself take up space. Not because you have earned it through enough sacrifice, or enough patience, or enough years of making yourself small, but because you were always allowed to, because the space was always yours to inhabit, because the voice in you that has opinions and boundaries and desires and needs is not your worst self. It is your truest one, and it has been waiting, very patiently, for you to stop apologizing for it. The moment an empath realizes they were never too sensitive, only surrounded by the wrong people, is not a single dramatic moment. It is a quiet, cumulative shift. It happens in the middle of a conversation when you notice you are doing the thing again, making yourself smaller, preemptively softening the truth of your experience to protect someone else's comfort. And you pause, and you make a different choice. It happens when someone dismisses your feelings, and instead of apologizing, you simply say, "What I felt was real," and leave it at that. It happens when you let someone care for you, and you don't deflect it or minimize it or immediately try to balance it with care given back. You just receive it. And it feels strange and tender and a little terrifying, and also like something returning home. It happens in 1,000 small moments of choosing yourself without punishing yourself for having needed to in the first place. You were always too much for the wrong people. But somewhere out there, and increasingly within yourself, you are exactly enough. Not in spite of your sensitivity, because of it. Because the capacity to feel deeply, to care honestly, to notice what others miss, and to hold the full complexity of human experience without looking away, that is not a flaw in the design. That is the design, and it always was.